Okay, hello, welcome to tutorial 3 of the poem analysis for the Panic Bird. In the first tutorial we did the analysis and annotation. In the second tutorial we looked at how we would structure the points that we took from that analysis and annotation. So in this third tutorial we're now going to have a look at how we might write the peel paragraphs from that first two tutorials. So we're using the peel format, which is the point, example, elaboration and link, and the question that we have, if we just remind ourselves, is what makes the Panic Bird so vivid, and we're looking specifically at lines 1 to 13 of the poem. So that's where we got to with the question. So from the first two tutorials, I think one of the first things that the poet uses, and this is the point, is the use of extended metaphor. Makes the Panic Bird so vivid in lines 1 to 13. Okay, that's the point. And then we can use the example. The poet compares a panic attack to a bird which just flew inside my chest, and more specifically, a vulture on a public utility pole. So that's the example there. So we've made the point, we've given the example, and now for the remainder of the paragraph, we are going to elaborate. By describing panic in terms of a bird, the poet can create more powerful images in the reader's mind through implied shared traits. Now that's the definition of a metaphor. It doesn't hinder if you give a definition of the tool that the poet is using. It tells the examiner that you understand what it is and why it's used. And then we go on to elaborate on the example. A panic attack obviously does not fly into a person's chest, or either rattle ribs or preen or roost later in the poem. But by comparing the sensation of a panic attack to a bird running amok inside his body, the poet is able to paint a more vivid picture of his suffering. Describing the metaphor in terms of carrion, garbage and excrement, there we pull more examples from the poem, associates panic with vultures, which are notorious scavengers, and conveys how strongly the poet feels about the infliction. So there we've explained why that example proves the point of the tool which answers the question, which is an important thing to do. Okay, now let's just go to the last point, which is the link. Therefore, and there's that word, therefore, that tells the examiner we're going into that final part of the paragraph. Therefore, the poet uses an extended metaphor to create clear and powerful images of what a panic attack feels like and how much suffering it creates by relating it to an attack by a vulture. So again, it's sort of a definition of what the extended metaphor is. Okay, so that's the first suggested peel paragraph that would be a good answer to this question. Okay, and again, I just want to draw your attention to the following, as I did in the last tutorial. That is your point. That is your example. That is all of your elaboration, and then finally, or explaining, and finally the link at the bottom. So if you look at the size of each point, the point is 1 or 2 sentences long, the example you give is just 2 sentences long, but then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 sentences long, and then a couple of sentences at the end. So by far the largest section of your peel paragraph should be the explaining and elaboration of why the examples prove the point, which answers the question. Okay, right, we'll move on to do the second Peel paragraph. Why don't you have a go at doing it first and then pause the tutorial here and then we'll carry on. So for the second Peel paragraph, to answer this question, I'm going to suggest that we use the point of structure and punctuation. So the structure and punctuation of the poem also makes the panic bird vivid in lines 1 to 13. Again, this was pulling from the points that we took from the analysis and annotation, and then through the structuring that we spent in the last tutorial 2. Okay, so for example, we give the example, the poet effectively uses stanza length and punctuation to mirror the feeling of a sudden panic attack during a normal day, or the day in the life of the poet. Okay, what exactly do we mean by that? Okay, we're going to explain. Oops, that's the same one. Let's just change the color a little bit. Each stanza through the poem is 4 lines long, which at first glance conveys an ordered regularity to the poem as it appears on the page. This ordered structure could be considered a metaphor for the normality of the poet's life at that moment in time, during that day. In contrast to this feeling of order are the punctuation and sentence structures used by the poet within each stanza. Sentences are truncated or skip over stanzas, while punctuation further creates an abrupt stop-start rhythm or meter to the poem. A title leading into the first sentence sets the tone for this disarray from the start. In this manner, the poet effectively creates disruption and disorder for the reader of the poem, a metaphor for the sudden onset and debilitating impact of a panic attack. And then we can come back to the last part. Therefore, the poet uses structure and punctuation to convey a vivid image of a panic attack or a panic bird striking during a normal day. Okay, and again, this isn't creating too much that we haven't already done. If we've done the analysis and the annotation and then we've structured our thoughts, this paragraph is fairly straightforward to write. So let's just again have a look at the length. There's the point. There is the example that we're giving of the point, and there is the explanation and elaboration of the point, and then finally we add the link at the bottom. Okay, so the poet has intentionally used structure and punctuation in the poem to mirror the effect that he's trying to create through all the other tools, which is sheer panic, which overcomes his normal daily routine when he suffers from the anxiety attack. Okay, let's do one more example Peel paragraph. Maybe you can pause this and have a go first, and we'll come back in just a second. Okay, so the third Peel paragraph that I'm going to suggest the poet uses as a tool to make the panic bird vivid is alliteration and onomatopoeia. The poet also uses alliteration and onomatopoeia to make the panic bird vivid. Okay, and then we give the examples. For example, brain, bone house, birdcage, rattling ribs, and ring, and wet. Okay, and then we want to spend a little bit of time explaining. Drawing the reader's attention to these words through alliteration allows the poet to build the image of the bird metaphor. So we define what alliteration and onomatopoeia is used to draw readers' attention to something specific in the poem. And here we have the B sound, or the B, br, created in the first example, is a sharp percussive sound which supports the idea of hysteria caused by a panic attack. relating it to the sound of cage bars or bones banging together. There's some alliteration of my own in that sentence. Okay. Similarly, the R sound in the second example, rattling ribs, is also onomatopoeia, because the sound imagined when skeletal ribs are struck like cage bars. And then onomatopoeia also works for the W sound in the last example of alliteration, where the image of forcefully twisting the dish rag to squeeze out water is related by the simile to the neck of the vulture, like a wet dish rag. The poet, wanting to strangle this panic bird, reflects his struggle with anxiety attacks. Okay, so there, we've explained and elaborated upon our examples, and then the final part is, therefore, to do the link, the poet uses alliteration and onomatopoeia to paint more vivid images of the panic attack by drawing the reader's attention to specific parts of the poem and the bird metaphor that he's created. Okay, so that is the third suggested Peel paragraph that I think would make a good answer. And again, there's your point, there's your example, there is all of the elaboration and explanation of the example that we've given for the tool, and then lastly is the linking sentence. Okay, so there's the effective Peel paragraph. Okay, so I think you're well on the way to giving a strong answer for this poetry analysis. If you had time in the exam, or if you wanted to, there's probably a final Peel paragraph that you could do, which is to mention the similes which are used, like a bird cage, like a wet dish rag, and expand upon that poetic tool that's used to make the panic bird vivid. If you want to do that yourself, you can have a go doing it and send it to me, and I'll have a look at it and send you some comments. Okay, but for now, that concludes the 3 tutorials for the analysis of this particular poem. Okay, thank you very much.